So obviously the big news at the moment is Elon Musk has purchased Twitter. He's promised that it's going to become more of a free speech platform. The hope is that they're going to lighten up on the arbitrary bannings, the auto censorship, maybe let some people who were banned come back, and just that the platform will become a lot more equal and a lot more open to people on the right side of the political spectrum and people on the left who disagree with the tech oligarchy that kind of controls things these days. Now, while I of course hope that is the case, I'll believe it when I see it. Until I see Elon Musk actually putting these changes into practice, I'm going to remain skeptical. Obviously, he's probably not going to make the situation any worse than it already is. But there's been so many times where people have gotten their hopes up. Here's how Trump can still win. Here's how Bernie can still win. That I just don't want to get on the bandwagon again and just get disappointed that things are moving in the right direction. I don't want to be a downer or a black pillar. I just be cautiously optimistic. It's definitely a good sign, but how good a sign remains to be seen. So the main thing people have been talking about other than that is the CNN tears or the fake news tears that have been shed by the various left-wing people on Twitter. These are people who have for years been saying, if you don't like the way this platform's run, go make your own platform. And then they deplatform the people who make the alternative platforms by removing their access to payment processing and getting them kicked off of servers, a la Gab and Parler. And for years they've been saying, look, Twitter, Facebook, Google, they're private companies. They can do whatever they want. The free speech laws don't apply to them. The First Amendment doesn't apply to them. We love our corporate oligarchy. So now obviously they're coming in and saying, oh, this is the worst. This shows that Twitter's a monopoly, that Elon Musk is going to have too much power. No one man should have this much power. Twitter is a First Amendment platform, although I don't really know how that would help their case. So if they're arguing it was a First Amendment platform, then that would mean they're against whatever. They don't know what they're talking about. But anyway, so they're saying, look, we can't have a platform that doesn't have massive censorship on it. So people are already pretending to leave and saying they're going to move to Canada. And keep in mind, there's no actual fear I've seen that Elon Musk is actually going to deplatform any of these people or censor them. He's just theoretically at least not going to protect them actively from trolls. And they're going to have to hit the block button themselves rather than have Twitter do it. And they're not going to just ban everybody who has a different opinion. And they can't handle that. And they're leaving the platform because of that. Like, when right-wing people normally leave a platform, it's because of a wave of bans or demonetization or something else. They're leaving because their position will not be changed in any way. And, of course, this kind of brings us back to the central issue. Now, it would be very easy for me to point out that these people are hypocrites and they don't know what they're talking about. And we have all the posts of the pictures of the tweets Robert Reich has put out, where he directly contradicts himself, and all these people are saying that freedom of speech and free flow of ideas leads to dictatorships and tyranny and Nazism and that kind of thing. And it would be easy for me to point out that these people are retarded and they don't understand, they don't have the mental capacity to get that what they're saying contradicts the other stuff they're saying. And there is some truth to that, but I do think there's truth in the other direction. I do think, and this is partially just because I'm trying to have a more interesting take than just going with the flow, they are correct that democracy and freedom of speech, as they would define it, does rely on massive censorship and massive political oppression, and it can't exist without that. As I've said many times on this channel, every regime, regardless if it's a theocracy or a monarchy or an aristocracy or a plutocracy or whatever, has some form of political repression and some form of political policing. I think something that is kind of unique is the degree to which our current world order tries to pretend that there isn't any. I don't know if that's really precedented. I think previously they were at least a little bit more open about it, that they just had to destroy certain opinions to maintain the order, And it's alluded to at times, but I think by and large, there's more of a pretense that we follow this abstract principle of freedom of speech. But this always brings us back to the biggest problem with democracy. What if the people legitimately vote to end it? Can they be allowed to do that? And if the answer to that is yes, then that raises the question that democracy is not the end of history. It's not what people naturally want. And people may prefer a one-party state or a military junta or a theocracy or a absolute monarchy as opposed to a democratic republic. And that opens up a whole other can of worms, and that's something they don't even want to talk about. If the answer to that is no, then the people don't have any real sort of popular sovereignty. It's basically the system is you can make very limited choices within prescribed boundaries, and anyone who makes comments or steps out of those boundaries is punished and shut down. And like I said, this is extremely common. Every regime in history does it. I just think the degree to which we're appealing to the abstract principles of people being able to vote for who they want and being able to choose their government is kind of something a bit new. So in order to maintain a liberal democracy, in a lot of cases, and here's another question. If these things are so democratic and they're so obvious and people will naturally prefer their worldview, why do they have to use Supreme Courts to just force shit through? Like, in a lot of Western countries, a lot of the things like mass immigration, abortion, gay marriage, the death penalty, these things changed not because there was a referendum. Now, there's obviously the exception of Ireland, but generally speaking, there's not a referendum. Sometimes there's not even an election on the issue. It's either kind of done in quiet by whatever parties in power, or more generally, it's just done by the Supreme Court. In order to maintain their democratic state where the people are sovereign, they need this small, unelected body of people who have more power than absolute monarchists did, because they can literally declare anything as anything. And they have an absolute veto over all other forms of government and all the people. If there is a referendum and everyone in America, aside from a majority of the Supreme Court, voted one way, the Supreme Court could overrule it, and there's nothing you can do about that. They can just do that. And that's how it works in most countries. And the fact that that is necessary, it needs to be trotted out whenever people don't vote the way they want them to vote, I think indicates that the whole system is just kind of a massive sham. But it's once again, it's the issue that there's necessarily anything wrong with a regime recognizing in a pragmatic way that it has to make certain exceptions, or it needs to do certain underhanded things, or use force, or use censorship in order to maintain its power, in order to prevent people from overthrowing it. No, I don't think there is anything inherently wrong about that, or else no government would exist and we'd have a state of anarchy. But my issue is more so, I really don't like dishonesty. And I know that's maybe a very naive and foolish position, but I don't like it when people say, we believe in freedom of speech, and they use that in the sense that we believe we want people to be freer in their ability to express themselves in order to justify massively censoring things. Because it doesn't make sense. It's like an oxymoronic. It's not this like they don't go to this abstract thing where if we don't restrict illiberal points of view, then the society we will get will have less freedom than if we did censor. So like the argument could be that if NatSox took power, then they would restrict public debate far more than Twitter ever has. But they don't really make that argument because they aren't intellectually capable of making that argument. They might kind of subconsciously understand that, But consciously what they're trying to do is saying we respect freedom of speech in terms of, like I said, defined as people having more freedom to express themselves rather than less. And to that extent, we have to prevent people from expressing themselves online. And I just wish people could be honest, and like Robert Reich and all these people could just say, look, we believe in the liberal world order, and we understand in order to maintain this, we just have to censor and deplatform everyone who disagrees with us. And I get why they can't do it, because it goes against the myth that they've built up. But saying don't hate there's a limit to how much you can say don't hate the player, hate the game. I mean, if you're going to choose to be a public figure and a public commentator, and your entire persona and everything about you and everything you say is just based on a lie that you know is a lie, unless Robert Reich is just mentally retarded, he doesn't get like what he writes, which is certainly possible. But it just bothers me. I just think I mean, let's be honest, everybody lies, everyone obfuscates, everyone has said, I didn't eat the cookie, or I don't know who did that, or yeah, I totally did that. I mean, everybody lies about that kind of stuff. I think there's layers to this. It's very easy to just say everybody does something, but there's like a difference between somebody who panics and says, oh, I don't know who ate the last cookie, and someone who has like a platform of millions of followers and is just completely dishonest and tries to actively harm society that way. I just think that that's different. One is more calculating, it's more done in cold blood. One is more just obviously fake, and one is a lot more serious. But you kind of get my point. My point is, I do agree with these people that it does give an open field to what they would consider to be dictators. Because it's been shown in cases like Hungary, where sometimes if people are given the option to vote for conservative authoritarian-ish governments, they will vote that way. We can call Putin a dictator. Even if there is election rigging in Russia, which, let's be fair, there probably is, I don't think Putin and United Russia would lose elections if they ran with no voter rigging. It might be a little bit closer, but I don't think there's really any real evidence to suggest that that Putin has zero public... Well, because if he had zero public support, he wouldn't be in power. While there is an oligarchy and there is an elite who enforces a lot of this on us, it's also true that people tend to get the government that they deserve and the government that they want. Sorry if that's kind of blackpilling, but that's just kind of the truth. If the Hungarian people didn't want Viktor Orban to be in power, he wouldn't be in power. Dictatorships require at least the acquiescence of the public, at least their indifference to the system and their unwillingness to change it in order to remain in power. Otherwise, you'll just get situations like Angola, where you'll have a 30-year-long civil war because whatever the regime in power is, although that's changed recently, but isn't able to muster the forces to remain in power. Like, I think with the case of the KMT in China, if the Chinese people legitimately wanted to be ruled as the Republic of China, the KMT probably would have succeeded in the Civil War. But that's just kind of the way I look at it. I think if we're going to talk about the concept of, do the Russian people, a majority of them, support Putin, support United Russia, and support the kind of policies and values he represents, the answer, I think, is an unarguable yes. It might even be like a super majority of 60 or 66% or 70 or whatever. And you can include in that like people who have similar ideas, like the current Communist Party is left-wing nationalist. There's a Just Russia, there's the Liberal Democrats. There's a bunch of other third positionist or socialist patriot parties that agree on some of the major social and foreign affairs issues, even if their economic policies are rather different. So, granted, a lot of these are fake parties, But just because it's a fake party doesn't mean it doesn't represent a certain portion of the population. Just because it might be like a fake left-wing nationalist, patriotic socialist party that gets 10% of the vote, it doesn't mean that 10% of the population doesn't have that political perspective. They're not syncretic. Syncretized? Whatever. But that's my thoughts on the matter. Hope you find that perspective interesting. Sometimes I try to take just kind of a more interesting perspective just because I find it a more intellectually interesting exercise. I'm not trying to say I'm that feeling too smart. It's just kind of something I try to do to differentiate myself a bit. So hopefully people find that interesting. God bless, and we'll see what the Elon is going to do.